Okay, so in this series of tutorials, I'm just going to cover the basics of a walk cycle. Might not get into every little nook and cranny, but we'll get you started. For this, I'm going to be using the Ultimate Walker rig that I downloaded from High-End 3D or Creative Crash, if you want to look at that one. I cannot remember the person's name now off the top of my head who created this. But it was the Ultimate Walker. It says version Dane 2 because I made a few little tweaks, created a character set, cleaned up a few things, added some Arnold materials to it. And this is in the scene files on Canvas for those following along during the course. Okay, so let's just cover some basics, the idea of how we're going to set this up. Now in class, I've talked about where the various controls are, so I'm not going to get into too much of that. The scene as it came in, if you're working from this, just down below in the range slider goes from 0 to 24. So the one thing I want to just, this overview of how this is structured is we're going to do a walk cycle here that's 24 frames. So I have it set to 24, but I'm actually going to start counting from 0. So if I count that as a frame, kind of like when you code, 0 actually gets counted once in computer language. So I will start at 0, and the cycle itself is going to go to frame 23. So it's actually 24 frames in the cycle itself. But then what's going to happen is when it gets to the end, what I want to do is frame 24 is going to be exactly like frame 0, with the idea that it's going to pick up every time, right, when it does the cycle. And later on, we can tell the keyframes that once they get done with frame 23 to cycle infinitely, right? So just walk in place. And the advantage of that is, we could bake all those keys out, and then we could layer other animation on top of it, or lots of different things. But this is how this works. Okay, so as I, and there's lots of different ways, like should it be 24? How do I set, for like an odd count? But this is similar to what I did in class, kind of on the fly, so I want to make sure I do something similar. Okay, so the very first thing is I want to set basically the pose that I'm going to use at the very beginning, and copy that to the end, and then I'm going to put one right in the middle. And in class, actually, what did I say? Walk, cycle reference. Images. So lots and lots of examples in here. A lot of students looked at this one. This is not a bad example here, and I'll maybe come back, refer to that. I don't think I'm going to do the high point in this one. I might exaggerate a little bit. Maybe I will. Who knows? In fact, I don't think I've done that before, so maybe I'll try that one there. There's lots of little variations. The book itself has some great examples. And obviously the one difference that we're seeing here between the others is that there are no arms, right? There is no upper body. There is no head. And this is intentional, so we can really get the idea of what is happening on this lower body, right? So if we get that right, then we can go along and figure out what the upper body is in later classes as you move on into animation. But if you don't get this stuff right, it doesn't matter what you do up here, right? So and this is standard practice. Animation Mentor does a lot of this, right? If you look at some of their student work, so we will do the same. So I'm going to refer to this. Some students I noticed in class actually took this image and put it onto an image plane. That's fine. I'm just going to set it off to the side as I work. Don't resize on me. There we go. Okay, we'll call that good. So I'll just keep toggling back and forth between that if I need to. All right, so, sorry, I should keep that open. So the first thing is I'm going to do this contact pose, where it's basically on the toe and on the heel here, and then I'm going to duplicate that same pose here, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the opposite side. So a great place to start at the very beginning is just let's move the body down. Starting with it kind of its straight leg is probably not a good idea. And again, all this depends on, the specifics of the type of walk that we're trying to use. We'll just go ahead and slide this one back a little bit here. Right, how big of a stride and a gait is going on, and what does that mean to this? the height that's here. And keep in mind we still haven't done any of the roll. So the one thing about this rig that we talked about in class is that it has a foot roll. So in fact, I'll just go ahead and roll it up like this. So we don't want it to roll right on the toe, right? We want it to appear to come up onto the, roll from the ankle and then come up off the toe. Actually, it would be a better example would be here in the back. For starters, I'm just going to put this at 30. You could change that later on. And I'm going to make the roll actually the negative here, right? So that it's kind of on the heel. And the one down here at the bottom, I'll do the same thing. I'll hit that foot roll 30. As you can see, as long as it's less than 30, as soon as I get to 30, it kind of breaks, right? It starts to, pivot onto that. So I'm going to move this maybe back a little bit. Okay. The other thing too, as we think about this, is there are little mechanics that happen with the body. If you want to, it's a little. I didn't show this in class because it's a little hard to see because the body is just spherical. But if we go to say the right, or oops, I want the left-hand view. This rig, when it was created, is down the negative z as its forward direction for whatever reason. That's fine. If I go to the shaded view here and I rotate it, these little balls right there, right? Those are where the hips are. So as I do that, the whole thing is that your body, a little bit or a lot, depending on who you are as an individual, rotates the hips back and forth, right? So it leads itself over to put this foot forward while it twists its hip to leave this one kind of back a little bit, right? So if I want to, maybe I'm just going to get systematic with it. I don't know if this is the best way to do that, but I'll just set in there so it's minus 15. That way I can do something similar in the opposite direction, 15 degrees, when I get to that middle pose. So, all right, so this looks okay to me. Maybe another thing I'll do here is that toe roll. It's kind of nice. So I'm going to bend that forward a little bit. Instead of going back and selecting all these and just doing the keyframe on each one of those, I've got this set up so that I have a character set. So walker, and if I click on the walker control, and it's also right here, right? So I clicked on it over in the inputs for any of these controllers, right? It's going to say walker underneath it. And so it has all these things feeding into it. So if I want to, I can just hit with this activated down here. If I hit S, it will keyframe that whole entire pose, which I'm pretty excited about, right? And then since there are no keyframes anywhere else, I'm just going to go to frame 24 and I'll hit another key right there, right? So what I want to make sure is any changes I do at frame 0, later on copy and paste, or you can do the magic time warp thing using the middle mouse button. But make sure that these keyframes at 0 are exactly the same same for 24, frame 24. Okay, so now I'm going to go to frame 11. I'll call that my midpoint. And let's go back to frame 11. And the first thing I'm going to do is, I put it at minus 15 here, so I'll just do 15. So I rotate the hips back this way. And this will come back here. I won't make it exactly perfect. But I'll put the foot roll about like this, and I'll make the toe 0. And then I'll take that one, and I'll push that forward. And we want the heel up, right? And a little toe raise. And I'll just hit S. So let's see what we get. We should see this slidey little thing going on here, right? Okay, so that's a good start. I can always come back and tweak this. Should this be further, off to the side? The other thing is, later on, we could also get to the point where we're animating this side to side, right? But I'm going to leave that alone for now. All right, so one thing that I noticed some students doing when they were, in fact, let's go to the passing pose, right? So I'm going to treat this about right here. I'll do frame 5. It's kind of an in-between frame here. Let's go back to the left view. It's kind of weird, right? You can see them shifting between the two as one goes behind the other. Let's just call it frame 6 for now. All right, so one thing that's weird is it's sliding, it's interpolating between the settings that I have here. Let's go back to perspective. Right? So you might see we have the heel roll and we have this toe up in the air. And then at frame 11, we have it, the foot lifting. We have the foot roll, at a certain angle. And so in between, it's just kind of moving, it's softly in between those two. The problem is we don't want that. We want this to be flat on the ground at this point. In fact, we want it to be flat on the ground sooner. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and make the toe 0 and the foot roll 0. So if nothing else, that foot is flat on the ground at this frame 6. The other thing is I'm going to lift the body up a little bit. Okay, so it's carrying that weight. Later on, we can raise it up even higher based on the drawing. In fact, I'm going to come back to that. Where did I put that? There we go. So we did the contacts right here and here. And then this passing pose is, you can see the foot firmly planted on the ground, straight, and this thing up in the air, right? Because we've lifted it so that we can place it back down on the ground. So don't lift it in such a way, and I'll show this in a second, that it's just flat. And also be careful with when you rotate this, you're really only doing the rotation here. I guess you could do it with the foot brake, but some of those things won't work that way. So I'll show this in a second. So this is the pose that we're going to try to do. All right, so now I'll connect with this one. And I'm just going to zero out all that toe roll and everything that's going on there. And at this point, I'm going to use the rotate to kind of position where that is. Now, I can already see some issues here, and we'll talk about that later. I'll just position it like this. I'm also going to do the toe roll, so it's a little bent, like it's being dragged. All right, and then I'm going to hit, I'll hit S. Okay, so let's see what happens to here. Right, so you can see it's lifting its foot up like we would want that. So now let's go to the other passing pose. So let's do this at frame 17. Okay, and if you do it at 16 or 17, 18, just the whole idea is here in the middle. Try not to be overly, like make it exactly at this frame. And some of them, I guess, are that way. But in this case, I have it selected here, this one that's forward. Halfway through the pose, we need it to be flat on the ground. So I guess we'll do it at 18. Right, so that's down, that toe is down, and it's nice and flat. The body is going to go up a little bit, and then this one for this foot here, we're going to zero out the foot roll. Right, so I'm not going to use the foot roll on this one, just because I want to have some extra control in how I rotate this later on. And we'll make the toe kind of dip a little bit. Let's hit S. Let's see what we get. Right? So already there's some things going on. You can see the hips are shifting a little bit. That's kind of nice. Let's go to the perspective view. The other thing too is just based on where I'm putting these keyframes here. If it seems like there's maybe just a little jump because it's playing 24 and then going back to 0, you can actually cut it to play just till frame 23. It'll be just a smidge smoother, right? There won't be that tiny little skip. It still knows where it's trying to go to frame 24, but it doesn't get there. It gets to frame 23, which is exactly what we want, because at frame 24, that would be frame 0 again, right? So we don't want to duplicate that same pose, even though it's just 2 frames out of a second, right? Okay, so that's just about 15 minutes. We'll call that part 1. Just a little overview here is that we started with the idea that, we're going to set these contact poses, and then we're going to go halfway in between those and set these passing poses. And then the next one, we're going to go to the recoil and high point. in each of these, right? And so basically we're almost like carving the animation down. We get the big poses, and it was like sliding its feet. And then we make it look like it's actually taking a step. And then we'll get these other poses. And then we'll start worrying about little tiny things where, say for example, as this foot comes forward right here, when we get to frame 11, you can see it's still staying, and it doesn't become flat until frame 18. We actually want this to slap, like, as soon as we put the foot down, to happen very quickly, right? We're also going to do other little things where maybe it hangs in the air and doesn't kind of softly land on the ground. It comes down with some force. But those will be probably part 3 of this little exercise, right? So anyways, we'll call that part 1. I'll see you in a minute in part 2.